Hi Neighborhood Church. Thank you so much for hanging out with us for Church at Home. To stay in the loop with everything happening at Neighborhood Church, check out ncvisalia.com, the Neighborhood Church app, or connect with us on social media at ncvisalia. Here at Neighborhood, we are for Visalia, and I want to share with you some of the encouraging things from the fall semester, particularly in student ministry. We began the semester in the backyards of a few NC families. We called it backyard groups, and we had an amazing time. Our hosts were fantastic, and they really served our students well. But then it got dark, and it got cold, and we had to switch things up. We ended up moving back on campus and utilized the additions to our campus, our new auditorium patio, and the space off the outpost. This morning, I want to say thank you to everyone who gave so generously to our For Visalia campaign. Our goal is to help the next generation win, and I think we got to see a glimpse of that last semester. We had a number of new students and new families join us, and I'm so grateful that we were able to provide community and connection during the pandemic. Without the space you helped build, we might not have been able to connect as well as we did last semester, so thank you. Hey, if you would like to partner with us and what God is doing at Neighborhood Church, there are 3 ways you can give this morning. You can text NC Visalia to 77977. You can give online at ncvisalia.com/give, or you can give on the Neighborhood Church app. Thank you so much to everyone who continues to give to the mission of Neighborhood Church. Hey, let's head into our teaching time for this morning.
Hey there, Neighborhood Church. My name is Jordan. I'm part of the team here. Thanks so much for hanging out with us today for Church at Home. Today we're going to be kicking off a new series we're calling One Thing is for Certain. Let me ask you, have you ever been 100% certain about something only to later find out you were actually 100% wrong? This has happened to me more times than I care to admit. When I was a little kid, for instance, I was 100% convinced that the live-action Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie would be my favorite film for the rest of my life. It's not. And then when I was in elementary school, I was 100% certain that one day I would be an Imagineer at Disneyland. As you can see, that didn't happen. I don't work at Disneyland, I work here. When I was in high school in the mid-2000s, I was 100% certain that wearing women's skinny jeans and eyeliner would make me look cool. This might surprise you, but that wasn't the case. When we're young, we're filled with optimism, we're filled with idealism, but as we grow older, the difficulties we face in life, the disappointments we experience, they make us less certain and more skeptical. Sure, we grow wiser with age and experience, but we also tend to grow a little more cynical and jaded and sometimes even bitter. Now, even as mature adults, sometimes our deep-rooted beliefs and fiercest convictions can be flat out wrong. It doesn't matter how confident we are, how convinced we are, or how certain we may be. When we're wrong, we're wrong. Let me give you a personal example from just a few weeks ago. At some point last month, I became completely certain that I would look amazing with a mustache. I had this glorious picture in my mind's eye. I imagined what I would look like if I cut off my beard and just rocked an epic stash. I thought I would look ruggedly handsome. I thought I would look intimidating and masculine, kind of like a cowboy or maybe a gym teacher from the 1980s. I'm thinking Tom Selleck, that kind of vibe. I'm thinking maybe Burt Reynolds, Ron Swanson from Parks and Rec, Hulk Hogan, or maybe Wyatt Earp from the movie Tombstone. I was absolutely certain I would look awesome with the mustache. But instead, that day, unfortunately, I learned the true limitation of my own certainty. So one Sunday afternoon, I came into the bathroom, I picked up my beard trimmer, and I did the deed. And when I was finished, first of all, it looked like someone skinned a Wolverine in the sink. But second, when I looked into the mirror, I was a bit surprised. Unfortunately, when I looked into that mirror, I didn't see Burt Reynolds or Tom Selleck looking back at me. Instead, I saw what appeared to be some sort of 33-year-old human walrus. I went from looking like a hipster lumberjack, with my flannel and beard, to instead to someone whose name looks like it should be at the top of an FBI watch list. I also quickly realized that at some point over the past decade, my chin had just completely disappeared underneath my beard. Great, wonderful surprise. The mustache was not a very flattering look, to say the least. And then comes in my wife, and God bless her, she was trying to be as supportive as she could be. She made a valiant attempt, but she gave me the old, wow, Jordan, it sure looks different. Quick pro tip. If anyone ever compliments your appearance by saying, it looks different, that means they hate it and you look terrible. So I was wrong about the mustache, I admit it. Despite my absolute certainty, despite the hopes and dreams I had for my mustache, I was completely wrong. Now, this is a bit of a silly story, I admit it. But on a serious note, how many of you can relate in some way? You were 100% certain about something in life, but you were blindsided when reality failed to meet your expectations. Maybe you were certain that your marriage would last forever, only to have it cut short in some sort of painful or tragic way. Maybe you were certain that if you just, worked hard enough, you could make your dreams come true. But the reality of your experience has just been a life filled with series of disappointments and heartache. Maybe this is you. Maybe you were absolutely certain about some sort of spiritual or theological truth you learned at church growing up or read in the Bible at some point, and then something in life happened that completely contradicted your sense of certainty, and as a result, it totally wrecked your faith. Now, this is actually what I want us to talk about today. I want us to talk about the tension that exists between our faith in Jesus and our desire for absolute certainty in life. Because here's the thing. Here's our point today. Here's what I want you to remember. There's a difference between authentic faith and absolute certainty. Here's a common misconception I've noticed about Christianity these days. There's this idea out there that when we follow Jesus, we suddenly get all the answers to life's burning questions. But that's simply not true. In Jesus, yes, we see the character of God. We learn about the ethics of God's kingdom. We learn about how He wants us to live. We learn so much about ourselves, this world, and God's plan for it. But there's still a lot of room for questions. In fact, the more you learn about God, probably the more questions you're ultimately going to have. Faith and certainty are not synonymous. Faith and certainty are not always synonymous. Now, this is true not only in faith, but psychology as well. There's this phenomenon I was reading about online the other day. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's actually very common in modern society. The Dunning-Kruger effect is a scientifically proven observation that many times the less we know about something, the more confident we are. It's actually scary to realize that when we're at the peak of our ignorance, we're actually at the peak of our confidence. It's when we're the most assured of ourselves. It's when we're the most dogmatic about our beliefs. But the more we learn, the more we realize how little we actually know. Our confidence kind of takes a deep dip, takes a big dive, until eventually it starts to slowly build up again with knowledge and experience and humility. As I was researching the Dunning-Kruger effect, I found this kind of snarky quote I really liked from a British philosopher named Bertrand Russell. He once said this: "One of the painful things about our time is that those who feel certainty are stupid, and those with any imagination and understanding are filled with doubt and indecision." I personally experienced this myself when I got a theology degree at seminary back home in the Northwest. I signed up to study the Bible and theology, and I thought I was going to walk away with a degree and all of the answers in life. But instead, with more knowledge, I actually came away with exponentially more questions. Ironically, with knowledge comes questions, comes tension, and in our faith, sometimes even with knowledge and experience, comes doubt. We ask big questions like, who really is God? What is His will for my life and our world? What does it really look like to follow Jesus in 2021? Why do so many churches and pastors and denominations have different interpretations of what it means to follow Jesus? These are big questions you're not going to be able to answer in one afternoon by just cracking open a Beth Moore Bible study. It's called wrestling with our faith. It's actually a healthy part of our spiritual journey, but it takes time and energy and effort. Time, energy, and effort we don't always want to invest, because it's easy instead sometimes to fall into this trap of wanting some sort of one-size-fits-all faith solution that results in unwavering certainty about life. It's when we think things like, if I just go to the right church, if I just understand the right theology, if I follow the right pastor on Twitter, my faith will give me all the answers I need in life. Now, when we do that, we turn faith into an equation that needs to be solved. I hate equations. I'm not a big fan of math, but aside from that, faith is not an equation. Years ago, I'll never forget, I had a poignant conversation with my wife, Kara, one night. I admitted to her that if I was really being honest, my faith was a source of anxiety in my life rather than joy. My faith wasn't building me up, it was actually tearing me down spiritually and emotionally. Why? Well, it's because I realized I was mistaking faith with a desire for absolute certainty. I wanted to know the answer to everything. I wanted 100% absolute certainty in my life. For so many years, I treated my faith like a Rubik's Cube, a puzzle that needs to be solved. Have you ever seen a Rubik's Cube? It's like some sort of masochistic mad scientist made a psychological torture device and passed it off as a fun game. You've got to try and twist and turn this little cube to match up the colors on all sides. There's all sorts of pieces and sides, and the more you twist it, the more confusing and complicated it gets, until you basically have an anxiety attack and just throw it on the ground in frustration. That's how I was treating my faith, like some sort of sick, twisted puzzle that God had just dropped and sat back and said, go ahead and solve that. I feel like at some point when I was younger, I also treated my faith like a magic 8-ball. Ever seen one of those little toys? It's an 8-ball, and you ask it a question and shake it up, and you look for your answer. It's got little answers on a dice inside. When I was younger, sometimes I treated God like a magic 8-ball. I wanted God to give me all the answers to all my questions. Hey God, what do I do with my life? Shake, 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 shake. Or, hey God, what is the purpose of existence? Why did you even bother to create the universe? Shake, shake, shake. Or God, why do bad things happen to good people? Shake, shake, shake. Who, what, where, why, when, how, God, how? Shake, 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 shake. Can you start to see why faith was more of a source of anxiety rather than strength for me? I was turning faith into an equation to be solved. Now, I would call that a fundamental misunderstanding of the purpose and substance of faith. There's a word I call that. I would call that a faith fallacy. And here's what faith fallacies sound like. It's when we say, think, or believe things like this. My faith gives me exhaustive, definitive answers to every question about God, the universe, science, relationships, culture, politics, and everything in between. That's a faith fallacy. Or maybe we say this. My faith gives me exhaustive and definitive knowledge of what God's unique will is in every situation and for every individual. That's a faith fallacy. Or how about this one? When we say, my faith gives me the authority to speak exhaustively and definitively about subjects outside of the scope of what Jesus taught. Faith fallacies. There's a big difference between authentic faith and absolute 100% concrete certainty. So, we've been here for a few minutes. I've talked about my beard. I've talked about Rubik's Cubes. I've talked about Ninja Turtles. Let's get down to brass tacks. What is faith? Well, before we answer that question, let's take a brief detour and open up our Bibles today. There's a story in John's biography of Jesus about a guy named Thomas. Thomas had a nickname in church history. You might have heard it. Doubting Thomas. It's kind of become an idiom in our culture, right? Don't be a doubting Thomas. First off, I don't think this is fair. I think Thomas gets a bad rep. He's not a bad guy by any means. He was just a person who valued certainty, much like any of us. So let's check out this story. Now, let me get you up to speed. If you're not familiar with the story of Jesus, he died on the cross and then rose from the grave 3 days later. After his resurrection, he went on a sort of post-resurrection tour, visiting his disciples, making appearances, and teaching before he left for heaven. Now, while that's happening, we see the following moment happen with one of his followers. Let's read together. Now Thomas, also known as Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." I think this is actually a pretty reasonable request. You know, this friend and mentor you've been following around for 3 years is brutally executed on a Roman cross. You see him dead. You see him buried. And now your friends are telling you he's walking around doing meet and greets? I mean, don't pretend you wouldn't be at least a little bit skeptical. Now, here's what happens next. A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my God." Thomas had a real face-to-face, flesh and blood experience with the resurrected Jesus Christ. And as a result, no surprise, he was filled with belief. But listen what Jesus then goes on to say. I want you to catch something he says here. It's really important for our conversation today. Then Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." Did you catch what Jesus said right there? Do you see what Jesus is getting at? Jesus is talking about us. He's talking about you. He's talking about me. He's talking about the countless generations of people who would believe in him, even without seeing, hearing, or meeting him face to face. Now, guys like Thomas, John, Peter, the disciples, all of these folks got to see Jesus face to face, in person, right in front of them. They heard his voice. They touched his physical body. They had a flesh and blood experience with the divine. Let me ask you, have you ever seen Jesus face to face? No, you haven't. Have you ever audibly heard his voice? Probably not. Have you ever hugged Jesus? Have you ever high-fived Jesus? Have you ever personally watched him perform a miracle right in front of you? The disciples did, but we haven't. We're about 2,000 years too late. So how do we believe? Here's how. Through faith. Listen to what Peter, a friend and follower of Jesus, wrote. "Though you have not seen him, you love him. And even though you do not see him now, you believe in him, and you are filled with an inexpressible and glorious joy, for you are receiving the end result of your faith, the salvation of your souls." What does this tell us about faith? I think it tells us this. Faith is trust in the absence of certainty. Faith is relationship without all the answers. And faith is love that fills the gaps of our knowledge. Faith doesn't actually hinge on absolute certainty. It hinges on trust. Do you know what trust is? Have you ever Googled it? Trust is reliance on the character, ability, strength, or truth of someone or something. So, when you look at it, you might say it this way. Our faith isn't dependent on certainty in something. It's dependent on our trust in someone. And that someone is Jesus. You know, when it comes to following Jesus, doing this whole Jesus faith lifestyle thing, it's so much more than intellectually subscribing to a list of theological propositions or ethical standards. It's entering into a real relationship with the God of the universe. We trust that Jesus was who he says he was, he did what his disciples said he did, and that by trusting him, we, as Peter wrote, can experience the salvation of our very souls. And not just some ticket to heaven we can cash in later. I'm talking about salvation that means a complete and holistic renewal of our hearts, minds, souls, and entire existence here on this earth and beyond. If you open up your Bible and you spend some time in Scripture, you'll see this is echoed by the various authors of the New Testament. For example, let's look at what the anonymous author of Hebrews wrote. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. Faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. The Apostle Paul, one of the earliest leaders in the Christian church, wrote a lot of the New Testament, and he said in his letter to the Corinthian church, "For we live by faith, not by sight." Paul also wrote in another letter, "May the God of all hope fill you with all joy and peace as you" what? Trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. Trust, faith, relationship. This is what it means to follow Jesus. There's a difference between authentic faith and absolute certainty. Certainty comes from exhaustive and definitive knowledge and experience that we don't have, right? But faith on the other hand, comes from trust and belief that results in a real life-changing relationship with God. Is any of this making sense to you? I hope it is, because I think this is really important. It's not how much we know, it's who we know and how that relationship changes our life, our community, our family, our relationships, our workplace, and our entire world. But here's the thing, that's not always what we want. Sometimes, many times, to be honest, all the time, we'd probably rather have 100% certainty than an authentic relationship with Jesus. We want answers. We want validation. So with that being said, it's actually incredibly easy to just ignore God. We can repress his spirit within us, and we can just, blindly subscribe to whatever theological or denominational lifestyle we choose. See, for some people, Christianity is the tenets of 20th century American fundamentalism or evangelicism. For some people, Christianity is Reformed theology or Roman Catholicism. For some people, Christianity is political conservatism or liberalism. And these examples and more, we actually let go of our faith and we stretch out to try and reach for certainty in areas where certainty is not actually guaranteed. Listen, guys, too many times we fill the gaps in our knowledge and personal experience with assumptions based on our personal biases rather than filling those gaps with faith. I want to share a quote with you that I found in my studies this week. It's from Greg Boyd. He's an author and theologian that we appreciate here at Neighborhood. He said this: "The certainty-seeking model of faith leaves us with an inflexible way of approaching our beliefs and makes us vulnerable to various challenges to our belief system. Since everything is a package deal that we must buy into in order to feel loved, worthwhile, and secure, we cannot afford to think flexibly, and therefore we are left with a faith that is brittle and easily broken. This means faith centered on politics will crash and burn when the vote doesn't turn out the way you wanted. Faith centered on a particular theology will crash when your life experience contradicts it. Or how about this? Faith centered on a desirable outcome like health, wealth, success, or whatever will crash if and when those prayers aren't answered in the way we hope. This is why, guys, this is so important. This is why at Neighborhood Church we echo the lifestyle of the early church when we say Jesus is the center of our faith. Not a theology, not a politic, not a philosophy, not a religious flavor of the month. Jesus, the living, breathing embodiment of God's divine presence. There's another theologian I really like. His name is Pete Enns, and he once wrote this: "The life of Christian faith is more than agreeing with a set of beliefs about Christ, morality, or how to read the Bible. It means being so intimately connected to Christ that his crucifixion is ours. His death is our death, and his life is our life, which is hardly something we can grasp with our minds. It has to be experienced. It is an experience. Now, let's go back to our friend Greg Boyd for a second, who also wrote this. The faith that God's people are called to embrace is one that encourages people to wrestle with God, to not be afraid of questions, and to act faithfully in the face of uncertainty. Faithfully in the face of uncertainty. What does this mean? Faith is trust in the absence of certainty. Faith is relationship without all the answers. Faith is love that fills the gaps of our knowledge. Now, as we wrap up today, I'd like to end with a metaphor that I stole from Mark Baker, a professor at Fresno Pacific University who is infinitely smarter than I ever will be. Imagine for a moment that your faith is a house. Now, way back in the day, houses were built out of stone. They were beautiful, strong structures built from extremely rigid materials. You know, the foundation was the same material as the walls and the roof. It was almost like a little castle. But today, houses are made much differently. Karen and I bought a new house in December, just a few minutes away from the church. It was built in 2016 using modern construction materials and principles. So, you know, there's wood, there's drywall, there's composite materials, and so on and so forth. Now, our faith as a house. Let's look at this metaphor. Sometimes our faith looks like a house built in medieval times. It's stone. It's pillars, it's columns, it's strong, it's sturdy, it's rigid. This means we believe what we believe, we know what we know, we're 100% certain that we're right about everything regarding faith and life. But here's the thing. If you're living in your stone house, your little mini castle, and a bulldozer came crashing into that stone house, the whole thing would actually collapse in on itself and fall apart. You see, the materials are so rigid, interconnected, and load-bearing that it can't withstand a major catastrophe like a rogue tractor crashing into it. Now, in the same way, faith centered on certainty in anything other than Jesus will completely fall apart if life hits it hard enough. Now, alternatively, our faith can look like a modern house. It's built on a firm foundation of concrete, yes, very strong, but then everything on top of that has a give to it. It's flexible, you know, things like wood and drywall. This is faith centered on Jesus. This is faith that says, I don't know everything, I don't have all the answers, and I probably never will, but one thing is for certain, I trust in Jesus. Now, if that same rogue bulldozer came crashing into a modern house, it might create a big hole in the side and then another big hole as it crashed through the other side. But since the materials are built to bend and flexed and adapt, the house stays standing on its firm foundation. Faith centered on Jesus rather than religious assumptions and the illusion of certainty will help us withstand even the fiercest blows life throws at us. Neighborhood, Jesus is the center of our faith, not intellectual certainty or religious dogmatism. And that faith is so much more than cold, hard facts. It's trust. It's a relationship. It's a journey. There are moments of clarity and there's moments of confusion. There are moments of confidence and moments of doubt. So, friend, wherever you're at today, wherever you fall on the spectrum of certainty, just remember, Jesus loves you, and He's inviting you into a very real relationship that can absolutely change your life and our entire world. If you're not 100% certain about one thing or another, that's okay. Our faith isn't dependent on certainty in something, it's dependent on our trust in someone.
The highest King would welcome me, and I was lost, but He brought me. Oh, His love for me, and oh, His love for me, and who the Son ransomed me, His grace runs deep. While I was a slave to sin, Jesus died for me. Yes, He died for me. And who the Son sets free, and always free indeed. And I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. And in my Father's house, there's a place for me. And I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. And you are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. And I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. And you are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. I am who you say I am. And who the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. And I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. And in my Father's house, there's a place for me. And I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. And in my Father's house, there's a place for me. And I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. And I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. And you are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. And I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. And you are for me, not against me. I am